Good day and welcome to RIF Lab. This presentation comes out of lived experience, but it doesn't just stay there. What you're about to see is the result of mapping what actually happens after someone speaks up in a workplace. Not what policy says should happen, but what unfolds in real time. RIF was not built from one perspective. It came from research, mapping, lived experience, and application. First, the research base. I looked at workplace harm, HR processes, labor systems, safety obligations, legal pathways, and trauma-informed practice. What stood out was the gap between what systems promise and what actually happens once harm is reported. Secondly, system mapping. I mapped how people move through internal and external pathways, HR, investigations, unions, oversight bodies, compensation systems, and informal resolution. The pattern was consistent. The systems exist, but they do not connect well. Third, experience. This work is also informed by direct navigation of multiple systems, representation experience, and watching how complexity affects people in real time. That helped convert the lived reality into structure. And finally, application. RIF takes that research, mapping, and experience and turns it into tools, training, workflow logic, and a future technology layer. So RIF is not just a concept. It is a framework built from how these systems actually operate, where they break down, and what would need to exist to stabilize the response. Most systems begin after harm becomes a file. What is missing is the layer before that. Early recognition, clear ownership, response triggers, and a record that follows the matter from disclosure forward. This slide shows the market gap. HR technology is crowded. There are thousands of tools managing payroll, compliance, documentation, performance, and case activity. But response integrity is still largely missing. The volume of workplace harm is not small. Ontario has roughly 7.9 million employed people, and Canadian reporting shows workplace harassment, sexual harassment, and violence affect a significant share of workers each year. Once these issues escalate, they enter already loaded formal systems, human rights, compensation, labor, legal, and regulatory pathways. These numbers show the pressure that exists after response has already failed to stabilize the issue early. Violence and harassment are also showing up in workplace systems. In healthcare, for example, incidents are serious enough that Ontario hospitals must track them, and reported violence still continues to rise. This is the opportunity. 8,951 HR tools, a $42 billion HCM market, and still very few, if any, enterprise platforms built specifically for response integrity. So RIF is designed for that missing layer, the point where early warning signs should become structured action. This is where unresolved harm goes when early response breaks down. At the OLRB, the pressure shows up in many matters that resolve before a final hearing, but that does not mean they were simple. It often means time, mediation, filings, representation, and institutional resources were already spent before resolution happened. At the HRTO, we see the human rights pathway. Applications, active caseloads, long processing times, and cases that often take years to resolve. By the time a file reaches this stage, the issue has usually already become complex, documented, disrupted, and emotionally expensive. WSIB shows another part of that cost: injury, disability, lost time, claims administration, and return to work complexity. When workplace harm is not stabilized early, it can become a compensation issue, a medical issue, participation issue, and an employment issue all at once. The pattern across all three is the same. Different systems, different mandates, separate timelines, but often the same underlying failure. Response was not coordinated early enough. RIF is aimed at the layer before this point, the moment where clear ownership, bounded discretion, safeguard triggers, and one continuity record could prevent harm from becoming a full system file. This slide shows why continuity matters. Harm usually does not collapse a person or an organization all at once. It builds through small failures: a missed response, a delay, unclear ownership, repeated handoffs, or concerns being raised but not acted on. Those gaps create cumulative harm. One missed action leads to another, and the response itself starts creating escalation. At that point, the process can become part of the injury. RIF is designed to catch those weak points earlier, before disclosure becomes delay, delay becomes exclusion, and exclusion becomes collapse. These are excerpts from the handbook that I've offered. I've mapped the systems people move through after workplace harm is reported: HR, investigations, unions, WSIB, HRTO, OLRB, MOL, and all the related processes. What emerged was a clear pattern. The systems exist, but they do not connect. That mapping became the foundation for RIF, first as a framework, then as training content, and now as potential technology layer for response integrity. RIF turns response into a managed process. It identifies gaps, assigns ownership, tracks impact, and keeps safeguards visible while formal systems continue. For individuals, there's clarity and safer participation. For employers, there's cleaner records and lower risk. For systems, there's better files before escalation. RIF was built around 6 response domains: authority, accountability, timing, information, impact, and participation. These domains turn discretion into structured decision pathways. The goal is not to decide the outcome. The goal is to govern the conditions around the process. Formal systems decide what happened. RIF manages what must happen now. It separates investigation from stabilization. So safety, communication, participation, and impact are addressed in real time. RIF begins at disclosure. The intake does more than collect information. It identifies risk signals and triggers next steps. Each report becomes a live continuity record with timelines, safeguards, communication, documents, and milestones in one place. This starts with structured intake. A report can be completed by the person experiencing harm or by whoever is receiving the disclosure: an HR, a manager, union rep, an investigator, or support person. The point is to capture the information once in a guided format instead of having it scattered across emails, phone calls, notes, and memory. This is where the intake becomes more than a report. The form includes trigger questions that identify the response that may need to escalate: safety concerns, retaliation risk, disability or accommodation needs, participation barriers, ongoing harm, or urgent response conditions. Those triggers are what allow the system to move from passive documentation to active response. Once submitted, the information feeds into a case record. This creates a single file where the matter can be tracked from disclosure forward. The goal is to stop rebuilding the story every time the issue moves between people, departments, or systems. This is the RIF Continuity Hub. This is the prototype environment where reports become visible as active response files. You can see case status, current phase, impact level, and whether the matter is stable, at risk, or escalating. This is the beginning of the response integrity layer, not just storing information, but making response conditions visible. There's impact monitoring, which tracks what the process is doing to the person while the case unfolds. Participation, psychological load, exposure risk, warnings, signs, and review dates can all be monitored over time. That matters because many systems track the file, but not the impact of the response itself. With safeguard tracking, this is where protective steps become trackable. If communication restrictions, accommodation supports, no contact measures, workload changes, or authority-bound safeguards are needed, they are logged and reviewed. That creates accountability around whether safeguards were identified, implemented, and maintained. So the prototype structure is simple. Intake triggers, case record, continuity hub, impact monitoring, and safeguards. Together, these become the foundation for a platform that can make response visible, traceable, and actionable. This is where RIF moves from framework into prototype. Intake begins at disclosure. The person reporting or the person receiving the report can capture the information once in a structured format. The form includes trigger questions for safety, retaliation, disability needs, participation barriers, and escalation risk. Once submitted, it becomes a case record that can follow the matter forward. The RIF Continuity Hub tracks the live file, case status, impact, safeguards, communication, and review points. The goal is simple: one intake, one record, visible response conditions. This is the operational value. Clear pathways reduce individual guesswork. For employers and HR, this means fewer hours rebuilding timelines, less duplicate intake, and lower exposure to legal, investigation, premium, or turnover costs. For oversight bodies, it means cleaner files, decisions tracked, timelines preserved, and less time spent reconstructing what happened after the fact. And for workers, this is about safety. One file, one owner, one clear pathway, less chasing, less silence, and less harm caused by not knowing. RIF does not add another process. It organizes the response so everyone knows what happens next. This is where I am looking to take RIF next. The framework, mapping, handbook, training direction, and early prototype structure are already built. The next step is technical development. Intake, trigger logic, dashboards, continuity records, and AI-assisted guidance. I'm also looking for pilot environments where the model can be tested with HR, unions, investigators, safety, and compliance teams. The goal is to move RIF from a framework into a working prototype, something that can be tested, refined, and eventually integrated alongside existing systems. That's the work as it stands right now. Thank you very much for allowing me to present this. I've included a link to my website and email if you would like more information. I look forward to what comes next. Thank you.